It was a dream of mine to get it done. It took 8 years to get it sold, but here we are now.
Did it really?
Yeah, I started pitching the show in 2004. We didn't start till 2008 or 2012.
In December 2020, Richard Rawlings made an announcement that stunned millions of devoted viewers. After 16 seasons, Fast and Loud was ending, not because the ratings had dropped or because the network canceled it. Richard himself chose to walk away, a free man who'd finally decided to abandon the empire he'd built. But the question nobody was asking at the time was the most important one. What really happened to Richard Rawlings? How does someone go from being one of Discovery Channel's biggest stars, earning hundreds of thousands per episode, to walking away from it all at age 56? Join us as we unveil the tragic life of Richard Rawlings, the printing press to gasoline dreams. Before there were television cameras and custom car builds, Richard Rawlings was just another entrepreneur trying to survive in Texas. Richard grew up in the shadow of his father's passion, cars. While other kids his age were playing sports, young Richard was at auto shows, building vehicles from the ground up. By 14, he'd already purchased his first car, a humble beginning that would eventually reshape his entire destiny. After high school, Richard didn't jump straight into the automotive industry. Instead, he took a more practical route. He worked as a law enforcement officer, a firefighter, and a paramedic, jobs that demanded discipline and taught him how to operate under pressure. These weren't glamorous positions, but they were honest work that provided a foundation and, more importantly, kept him disciplined. In 1999, at 30 years old, Richard founded Lincoln Press, a printing and advertising company in Dallas. It was the opposite of charming. Printers and offset machines don't make for great dinner conversation, but Richard had a gift for business. He took that company from a modest $600,000 operation and grew it into a $6 million powerhouse. When he sold it in 2004, he'd accomplished something remarkable. He'd created legitimate wealth from nothing but his own determination. That money was supposed to fund his dream. In 2002, while still running Lincoln Press, Richard opened Gas Monkey Garage. Here was a man doing something extraordinary. He was living the American dream on his own terms. A modest Dallas custom shop that bought old cars, restored them into masterpieces, and flipped them for profit. It was beautiful in its simplicity. For the next decade, Gas Monkey operated in relative obscurity, building an incredible reputation in automotive circles while remaining largely unknown to mainstream America. Richard was 50 when the Discovery Channel came calling. Most people would have been winding down at 50. Richard Rawlings was just getting started. But here's where things get interesting. When that network deal came through, when Discovery Channel came knocking on his garage door with a camera crew and a contract, Richard Rawlings had no idea what he was about to trade away. The opportunity seemed endless, but what happened when he finally got the life he had always dreamed about and discovered it was totally nothing like what he imagined? When everything seemed possible. On June 6, 2012, Fast and Loud premiered on the Discovery Channel, and everything changed overnight. The show was an instant phenomenon and people loved him. Richard Rawlings was paired with Aaron Kaufman, a talented mechanic with an almost spiritual connection to machinery. The chemistry was electric, and more importantly, it felt real. By all accounts, it was real, at least at first. Richard would find the cars, junkers with potential that most people would pass over, and Aaron would bring them back to life. Together, they would transform rusted metal and broken dreams into works of automotive art. The show pulled in millions of viewers. By the time ratings stabilized, Fast and Loud was one of the network's highest-rated programs. But success in television comes with a price that nobody talks about. The deadlines were brutal, but that wasn't all. Aaron Kaufman eventually revealed the devastating truth. They were expected to complete 12 major builds every 6 months, That's roughly 110 hours of work per week. Aaron spoke of falling asleep inside the cars he was restoring. He also talked about the creative compromise. He had entered the restoration business to build massive, elaborate vehicles that took months to perfect. Instead, the television schedule demanded smaller, quicker projects that could be completed in 9 days or less. Richard had built something magnificent, but the cost of maintaining it was becoming astronomical. Every day the pressure mounted. Every week brought new expectations. The network wanted more spectacle, and Richard, the man who'd always delivered, kept pushing harder. For a while, the money flowed. Richard was making $30,000 per episode. He was appearing at industry events. Gas Monkey Garage had become a destination, a temple for automotive enthusiasts. He had restaurants, merchandise deals, and brand partnerships. On paper, Richard Rawlings had achieved what most people only dream about, but papers lie. Everything was perfect on the surface, and Richard had his dream. But then, in a moment that would shake everything to its core, the one person he trusted most in the world walked away. But what really happened between Richard and Aaron? What's the story behind a breakup so significant that it fundamentally changed what Fast and Loud would become? When the Dream Team fractured. In March 2017, Aaron Kaufman shocked fans when he announced that he was leaving. Richard took to the Gas Monkey Garage blog to explain it publicly. He wrote that Aaron's departure came completely out of left field. He also acknowledged that Aaron had been there since day one, and that the next chapter would be a painstaking process. But between the lines was something else. The partnership that had made Fast and Loud possible was dissolving. What Aaron revealed later was more shocking. He spoke of creative differences that were so fundamental that he and Richard could barely be in the same building together. He described a relationship in which they once shared dreams but had eventually diverged over what mattered. In a December 2021 interview, Aaron stated plainly, "Richard and I were having difficulty being in the same building together. It was his building, it's his show, and it's his operation." More damaging, Aaron revealed something that shattered the illusion. They didn't actually spend time together when the cameras weren't rolling. The chemistry that millions of viewers had watched for 5 years was entirely manufactured by proximity and the demands of production. It was all for the camera. When one is forced to work 100 hours a week with someone, chemistry happens. But it's not the same as friendship. It's not the same as actually knowing someone. Richard's decision was to push forward anyway. He had to. The network and the fans expected it. But the show was fundamentally different now. Fast and Loud continued for 4 more seasons, but something had died, and it was never the same after Aaron left. The best builds in the show's history, Aaron would note, had come from their disagreements and compromises. Now there was no one to disagree with. There was only Richard, the businessman, making all the decisions. But what happens to a man's marriage when his entire life is consumed by work? And how does he rebuild when everything falls apart at the same time? When success wasn't enough. While Richard was managing the implosion of his professional dream, his personal life was crumbling in real time. In 1993, at 24 years old, he'd married Karen Grames. That marriage lasted 1 year, but Richard never gave up on love. In 1999, he got married to Suzanne Mergel in Las Vegas. For 20 years, it seemed like maybe the second time was the charm. They had a life together in Dallas and shared in the ascent of Gas Monkey Garage. They watched Fast and Loud become a phenomenon. But by 2019, it was all over. Richard went through what he himself would describe as a messy public divorce. The details don't matter as much as the pattern. Another relationship, another failure. Richard was now in his early 50s, looking at a marriage that lasted longer than his 20s, but still ended in dissolution. And then came the bar. In 2009, Richard had opened Gas Monkey Bar and Grill, a Dallas restaurant and concert venue that licensed his name. It was supposed to be another empire-building venture. Instead, it became another liability. In 2018, the partners at the bar sued Richard for $6 million, alleging defamation and claiming he had made false statements that derailed a third-party buyout. It was a civil lawsuit, not criminal, but it was messy and public. It was the kind of thing that makes people question one's integrity. Richard countersued for copyright infringement of the Gas Monkey brand. The dispute was finally settled in August 2021, with both sides dismissing their claims and the venue eventually rebranding as Amplified Live, with no connection to Richard. But the damage was done. Another business venture had turned into a public battlefield. By 2019, Richard Rawlings' Garage, another restaurant he had opened in Harker Heights, Texas, had permanently closed. The businesses kept failing, and the relationships kept dissolving. The man who'd built an empire was watching it fragment in real time, and nobody was really talking about it. Here's what people don't understand about Richard Rawlings' situation. He wasn't just running a garage and a television show. He was managing an entire ecosystem of expectations. Employees were depending on him. Networks were demanding content. Fans were expecting consistency. His personal life was in tatters. And he was supposed to wake up every morning and be the charismatic, confident guy that millions of people tuned in to watch. That takes a toll that can't be quantified in ratings or revenue. For 18 years, Aaron had been there as a counterbalance, and when he left, the show continued, but it wasn't the same. The crew changed. Tom Smith left. Jordan Butler left. Scott McMillan left. Each departure was another fracture in the foundation. Some of these guys went on to start Fired Up Garage, which ironically became a Discovery Channel show that was produced by Richard Rawlings himself. So Richard was essentially producing his own competition while trying to maintain Fast and Loud. The contradictions piled up, and the pressure became unbearable. By 2020, the pressure had become more than unbearable. The show that once brought him joy was now the thing keeping him trapped. And then came the decision that shocked everyone, including maybe himself. What would cause a man to walk away from the biggest success of his life at the exact moment when it was bigger than ever? When the king walks away. In December 2020, during the pandemic, Richard Rawlings made a decision that shocked the industry. He announced that Fast and Loud would end. It wasn't because he was forced out or because the ratings had declined. The ratings were actually the best they'd ever been in season 16. Richard just chose to leave. When he appeared on the Joe Rogan Experience podcast to discuss it, he revealed something that most people had missed. His Discovery contract was extremely restrictive. It controlled what he could do, how he could do it, and what he could say. After 16 seasons, after building one of the network's most successful franchises, Richard realized he'd traded his freedom for a paycheck. On the podcast, Richard talked about being a free agent for the first time in his adult life. He'd built Gas Monkey Garage, sold his printing company, and created a television empire. But he'd never actually been free to just be Richard. He'd always been building towards something, always performing and managing expectations. At 51 years old, Richard walked away from all of it. He was free, but freedom after nearly 2 decades of relentless ambition feels a lot like emptiness. Richard got his freedom. He was liberated from the Discovery Channel contract, finally free to do whatever he wanted. But 5 years later, at 56 years old, the question becomes, did freedom feel like victory or like defeat? And what does a man do with his life when the thing that defined him for 16 seasons finally comes to an end? What remains at 56? Fast forward to 2025. Richard Rawlings is 56 years old. Gas Monkey Garage still exists, still produces content on YouTube, and still builds incredible cars. But it's not the same cultural phenomenon that it was. Fast and Loud is gone. The restaurant ventures have mostly failed or been dissolved. The television empire has crumbled. The internet is filled with clickbait videos claiming Richard is in jail, facing criminal charges, or experiencing some dramatic downfall. None of it is true. These are fabricated narratives, profit-driven content designed to exploit his fame. Richard, to his credit, has debunked these rumors publicly and moved on. The old bar lawsuit was settled years ago. There are no active legal cases. There's no dramatic courtroom collapse waiting to happen. But that's almost worse in a way. The real tragedy isn't a single explosive moment. It's the slow, grinding realization that he built something magnificent and lost it anyway. It's the understanding that one could achieve everything society tells you to achieve and still feel empty. Richard has spoken about going broke twice in his life. He's mentioned having to stay at his sister's house when things fell apart. He's been through 2 failed marriages. He's watched his best friend and business partner walk away from him. He's experienced the frustration of being creatively constrained by the very network that made him famous. So here's the heart of it all. Richard Rawlings achieved more than most people ever will. He built empires, he made millions, and he became famous. But somewhere along the way, in the pursuit of success, he lost the very things that make success meaningful. Now at 56, with nothing left to prove and nowhere left to climb, what does the tragedy of Richard Rawlings really tell us about the price of ambition? The tragedy of almost. The real tragedy of Richard Rawlings isn't that he made terrible decisions. By most objective measures, he has been phenomenally successful. He built multiple businesses from nothing. He created one of Discovery Channel's most iconic shows. He's worth millions of dollars, owns an incredible collection of custom cars. By conventional standards, Richard Rawlings won. But success has a way of highlighting what you've lost along the way. He sacrificed relationships, 2 marriages that didn't work out, because he was always building, always pushing, always chasing the next thing. He sacrificed his creative partnership with Aaron Kaufman because the pressures of television made genuine collaboration impossible. He sacrificed his freedom to the Discovery Channel because that's what you do when you're ambitious. You trade pieces of yourself for bigger opportunities. At 56, Richard got what he wanted. He's free, rich, and famous. But he's also a man looking back at a career that peaked when he was healthier, younger, and surrounded by people who actually believed in the work rather than the paycheck. Aaron said something telling in one of his later interviews. He and Richard see the world very much differently. They see how to interact with humans differently. They see what relationships with people are worth differently. By the end, they were strangers working together under artificial deadline pressure, not partners building something meaningful. That's the tragedy. Not one bad night or one catastrophic failure. It's the slow realization that you can build an empire and still lose everything that made building it worthwhile. What haunts Richard now, if anything, is the clarity. He has enough life experience to understand exactly what happened and why. He can see, in retrospect, that the decisions that made him rich also made him isolated. The ambition that drove him forward also drove people away. The success that seemed like vindication was actually a trap. He had every opportunity to course correct at multiple points. When Aaron was struggling with the schedule, he could have fought the network to reduce the pace. When his first marriage failed, he could have stepped back and reassessed. When his business ventures started failing, he could have consolidated and focused on what actually worked. When the bar lawsuit exploded, he could have recognized it as a sign to simplify. Instead, he kept building and pushing until he became a victim of his own ambition. And the darkest part is that he's smart enough to know it. At 56, Richard understands exactly what he sacrificed and what he lost. He can trace the exact moments where different choices might have led to different outcomes. For a man with his pride and his drive, that kind of clarity must feel like its own special kind of punishment. What do you think could have saved Richard Rawlings from this trajectory? Was his downfall inevitable from the moment he got that first network deal? Or were there turning points where different choices might have fundamentally changed everything? Share your thoughts with us in the comments section. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the next video showing on your screen. You will enjoy it.